We're just getting started, and we have a loaded agenda today covering a spectrum of topics from semiconductor materials, RISC-V processor, the pervasive IoT, 5G, 6G, the advanced packaging, and the most trending AI and deep learning. I feel privileged and honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Subhasis Chaudhuri, Director of IIT Bombay. He is a former K.N. Bajaj Chair Professor at the Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT Bombay. He is known for his pioneering work in computer vision and is an elected fellow of all the three major Indian science academies: National Academy of Sciences, India, the Indian Academy of Sciences, and Indian National Science Academy. He's also a fellow of IEEE and the Indian National Academy of Engineering. He was awarded the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize for Science and Technology, one of the highest Indian science awards for his contributions to engineering sciences by the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research in 2004. Welcome, and over to you, sir.
Good morning. I'm sorry I'm not there to be with you in real time because of some other engagement. I am giving you a recorded lecture. My apologies. The idea of giving a talk at this BLISA conference, I must say that is quite unique to me because I have never been to such a conference because I'm not from this particular area. But being the director of an institute like IIT Bombay, sometimes you tread into difficult zone where you have to accept certain invitation and talk on things for which probably I'm not the expert at all. So I still said, yes, let me try it out and to enjoy talking on some topics that probably India needs very, very, I think, dearly at this particular point. So let me share my presentation. So just give me a minute so that I can share my screen. And then I think here, yes. So what I thought that in this particular conference, I'll talk on something which is more on the basis of education. So specifically, semiconductor education. And I would like to give some perspective of my own. And I hope it's the right kind of perspective because a lot of things are happening in India, not only in education sector, but also in the semiconductor area. So to start my talk, let me go into, I just searched for something and got into this 1973 article in Scientific American that came. It says metal oxide semiconductor technology. So it's a new thing, of course, it was coming MOS technology. And let's see what the title reads. It says the MOS fabrication technique can put more than 10,000 electronic components on a silicon chip, only a few millimeters across. Now just look at this. Today, of course, you may be saying, what is this? 10,000 electronic components? What are you talking about? But this is 1973. And if you try to contextualize in 1973, you have to possibly go back to 1965. Okay. And why is so? Because that's where I think a gentleman called Gordon Moore, who is still, I think, probably one of the most famous names in semiconductor industry. That's his proposition came forward. So he put it up in 1959 or so, that he started plotting and said something that the unit cost falling as the number of components per circuit rises, then actually every year you will have roughly, the number of components that you can add into your VLSI chip, or those days, of course, it was not really VLSI, but how much you can pack it, okay, over a certain surface area, it doubles, okay? Now, if you look at that, his plot is from 1959 to something 1975. And he did it on a logarithmic plot. So you can see that in the log scale, it's like every times, what is the time it takes to become twice, right? The packing density, if you look at that. Now, in the log scale, of course, this becomes linear. That means your growth is exponential. And since I am actually something, you work on signal processing and other, we know the exponential thing is not so good thing to handle. But in this particular domain, this has been the greatest boon that the electronic industry could think of. Okay. So this turned out to be true for a long time, and even now it continues. But then you come to 1980, and most of you might have seen this particular book. Those of you who are like in those days started studying the Mead and Conway, probably the very first book that talks about VLSI. Okay. And of course, it became an instant hit in terms of what should be taught. And there's a great potential in this particular area. Okay, of course, before that, we had like a LSI, then you had VLSI, and of course, then we don't talk anything beyond VLSI. Everything is VLSI. It's just like what is the size that you are talking about? Like, we are in the almost in the nanometer range. Now, if you have started like this, then let's look at this at 2001. Okay, in E times, we said that as VLSI era ends and SOC taps out, just concentrate on the first few words, as VLSI era ends. Okay, so it is assumed that VLSI, the whole concept, the industry, and so much of thing that has been happening, okay, it's going to end, okay, the era. And of course, we engineers will not be sitting idle. Of course, something else will happen. System on chips will be there, and then futures will be on the cores. So let's not worry about the cores and others, but let's look at only the first one. The VLSI era, okay, ends. That is like a master statement. But did it end? Of course, not, right? So look at this, like, why is this kind of thing? Let's go back to that special plot, okay, that Moore's law. And the issue there is that, you started plotting and the plot was like 19 up to 75. And you think that at some point things should saturate, you will hit the limit. And probably the limit you have already going to hit by that time, right? So that's probably one of the things that happened. And there was another fear factor. Now let's look at a very interesting kind of book in 1986. It's a science fiction. Okay, it's called Marooned in Real Time by Werner Winch. Now, what does it say? See, the thing is the pace of growth in VLSI, because it's an exponential thing, it keeps on growing so fast, okay, that this particular science fiction was written with a view that things is like when things are happening so fast, so much of progress is being done. So that means your incremental progress that happens, the period gets shortened, okay, every time. Let's say, now we're talking Moore's law, we always say that, okay, this is like, doubling and doubling and doubling, and you keep the period same. But if you say that my W thing is similar, then what happens is that the time, if you look at the time, the corresponding, the gain, that is incremental gain, if you keep it like this, then what would happen? Now, this particular thing becomes important. Okay. Why? Because, you're basically started, like in signal processing, we call it like, that your next sample comes faster and faster. Okay. So that leads to your breathing time to new technology, something new becomes shorter and shorter. And if that happens, then it comes to some kind of a point where humans simply cannot think of what's going on because things are happening too fast. And that's basically is the kind of a idea behind the science fiction. And that's what was happening because the growth has been so phenomenal, particularly the progress, it just keeps on happening. The cost keeps on coming down. And naturally, there was a big market. The mobile things came up, okay, and then the display technology, so many other things happening. Then there was a massive kind of a boost in the semiconductor industry. So if you look at it, so we thought we should be doing great. But look at this particular, very recent kind of newspaper article. It says Tata Motors post almost like 4,000 crore loss in June quarter, in one single quarter. And what is the reason? It's a chip shortage. And just before that, we said this is such a great opportunity, such a great things happening. So the market should always produce that much, okay? Because we could be more efficient, we could produce more. But naturally, we're not able to keep pace with that. And today you talk about any automobile industry people, and this is one of the main reasons why the automotive sector is actually losing out is because of this particular thing is the chip shortage. And as we keep moving towards the e-vehicle, then you don't have those IC engines. Now this would be mostly electronics. And of course, there would be other devices also. There would be drives, others. And for that, you need a lot more components. So today's automobile and all these industry are heavily dependent on this, right? Now, if you look at it, where do we stand? Okay. So if you look at this way, okay, so, I think there is a background sound, but if you forget about that. So if you look at this particular plot, okay, you see the main thing that the pie graphs here. What is the progress in kind of thing that is happening in this area of electronics? And I think our colleagues in E department have been Sarup Ganguly, Udayan Ganguly, they have done a wonderful job in terms of summarizing the contribution. So if you look at some of the key, I think journals and, the venues where our papers get published, when we started very modestly in terms of, 2006 in IIT Bombay, along with other places, then there hardly, that much of contribution. And then thanks to, the nano initiative of the government of India, suddenly you find that this has now picked up. And today, if you look at it, the number of papers that come out in the something like in transactions on electronic devices, the total India is third in number of papers that our people publish. In EDL, it's little still low. We are 8, so roughly 3%, and there's a tremendous still scope for doing it. So that's about in the research. So that means we are there in many of them that India, particularly the researchers have proved that yes, there's a lot more things to be done, and they are ready to take up the challenge of semiconductor technology. But of course, doesn't get reflected in the industry sector. So if you now look at it, very recent kind of the announcement that our Honorable Prime Minister made recently, that the government of India now is making a $10 billion plan to create an ecosystem where actually it will help mobilizing all this industry, academia, everything together, okay, to come up with something to do with the semiconductor industry, because India has been lagging. There's no proper fab, I would say, okay. So how do you produce? How do you manufacture? Like we have to have like Make in India initiative, but how do you manufacture if you don't have that kind of facilities, which unfortunately is expensive, okay, particularly in this area because the investment is pretty high. So if you have to now materialize that the government of India is trying to help in terms of creating that kind of an industry ecosystem, where leveraging this particular support that the government is providing, hopefully the various industry in India, as well as those who are from abroad, they can actually leverage it to make India as one of the possible hub for semiconductor industry. Now, if that is required, and for particularly, I would also say that generally, looking at what is our core strength as well as in the business, they have picked up certain areas like power devices, IoTs, and the EVs and displays and other, where probably you don't, as of now, you don't need that kind of, very, the fab could be at a lower level rather than going almost nearly like a, 5 nanometer or 10 nanometer level, right? So that's like the, I think, conscious decision, okay, by the government of India, MIT specifically, along with the other people, those who are doing the brainstorming. Now, if that happens, the question is that when you want to create an ecosystem, that's where it comes to our role as from the academia, is that what about scaling? How do you get the manpower, okay, that the industry needs? Of course, industry would look additionally, what happens to my capital, what about my land, other things, technology, everything is, of course, important. But in this part, I'm looking at the skill gap, right? And if you look at today, we have 23 IITs. Out of that, let's say top 7 of them have a reasonably high level of, I would say, the maturity in terms of producing a larger number of manpowers compared to some of the newer ones. We have, several NITs, 30 of them, 25 triple ITs, 1,000, let's say close to that many universities. And of course, if you look at the graduates, the number is mind-boggling. But what the semiconductor industry needs, it's very, very specific. It has to be knowledge intensive. It is technology intensive, and it demands a lot of intellectual capital. That means the training or the skilling that is required is at a very, very high level. Now, the question is, how do you provide that kind of support? Okay, because there is a need for it. If you look at today, at least that's what has been forecast, I would say that, before I come to today, they say that it's about something like 85,000 manpower is required if you have to run this on the kind of scale that they have been thinking about. And with an attrition of like, not everybody you train will be here. Some of them will try out their own. So supposing you assume 50% retention in this particular area, then what you need to do is that you have to produce 5,000 PhDs, 30,000 BTech and MTech, and then of course you have technicians, diploma, others, 50,000. Okay. Since we are talking about IITs and NITs and things like this, so I'll concentrate mostly on the PhD and the BTech MTech part. So just get a number, 5,000 PhDs and 30,000, let's say, BTech and MTech that we have to produce. And this is not in all areas. This is purely in the semiconductor related area. Of course, it involves many different things. It will include electrical engineering, computer science, material science, chemistry, okay. All kind of things, it will be required. Okay, so overall, if you look at it, then definitely the question that will arise that how do you teach this overall, if I may call it as electronics, and then we have to produce so many manpower. And normally, whenever such thing happens, particularly in such kind of high knowledge level, that particularly a profession that requires a level of sophistication. So we'll be teaching a student a training for 4 to 5 years of lesson, but these people must be, capable of surviving in the industry for the next 30 to 40 years. So That will not happen that with the same kind of lesson because the technology changes. So which means that you will have to keep on doing reskilling at a regular interval. Otherwise, there will be a lot of obsolescence, right? So let's look at then a quick count, like a back of the envelope count, okay? And I take it roughly IIT Bombay as a, something that I'm aware of. So when we look at the number of PhDs that we produce in this particular relevant area, I'm not talking, we produce a lot more, but if you look at the semiconductor related area, roughly we produce about 50 such PhDs, okay? About 100 to 150 BTech, MTech in the all related areas from various departments. Now, if you count how many IITs, let's say the top 5 or 7 of them would produce the similar number. Newer one would be less. Some of the, if you go to the NITs, they will be producing less number of them. So if you put them all together, okay, plus so many CFTIs are there are state engineering colleges, they are also producing, okay. And if you add them up, what number do you get? This will be nowhere close to 5,000 PhDs or 25,000 or 30,000 engineers in this area. And particularly PhD is a slow process, right? So if you are to get to that number, you need a lot more time, okay, and a lot more places that they should do that. So how to create the manpower? Okay, that's actually one of the big problems. Now, since we are talking about electrical engineering and let's say electronics, so let me just give you a ballpark kind of a definition of something like a throughput. Like if you assume, and throughput of what? Not like it's a digital system or something, throughput of our educational system. Let's say IIT Bombay, what's our throughput? So how do you measure or quantify, let's say the efficiency, if I may call it, it's not actually efficiency, like the productivity of IIT Bombay, right? In terms of the graduation, in terms of the outcome-based analysis. So let me define it as number of graduates per faculty per year, okay? And this is, I'm talking about in all areas. So if I go through this number, this particular figure, for the last 4 or 5 years, it is between 4 and 4.5, okay? And of course, you could go back earlier days, it was even much, much less, okay? If you go back to, I think I would say, if you Gurukul time, it will be like half or something, okay? Because you spend a lot more time with one person, so graduation was much slower. So if you use that many people, if you know how many experts you have in this area, okay, and if you multiply with this throughput number, so you know how many of these PhDs are, and this, by the way, when I talk about the graduates, it means PhDs, masters, BTech, all of them. So you get a rough idea of how many PhDs or BTech or MTech that you will produce in this period, okay? Now the question as what you would want if you have to leverage this and if you have to, really bootstrap the number, so you have to increase the throughput. And the implication of this, I'll come to that in the next slide, is that we have to go for enhancing the throughput. Can we make 6 or 7, something like that? It's very, very unlikely, okay? For example, even if you take some of these US universities, like, I would say some of the large universities, okay, with a lot of undergraduates and others, so something like Texas A&M or other, take some universities. I doubt it'll be more than 5 to 6. Okay, so it's very difficult beyond that. Okay, you don't lose contact with the students, right? And this, what happens is also defines the cost of education, as well as the infrastructure that I need to do it. So basically, you have a capex and the opex, right? So how much of this you are willing to invest? Thankfully, this particular semiconductor initiative that is the government of India has taken, they are earmarking some of them for this kind of, creation of the, let's say, infrastructure, and hopefully they will put quite a bit of money in terms of the recurring cost, okay? So any particular university would probably say that, okay, if I have to increase the number beyond certain things, I cannot go beyond certain number of throughput, but I'll have to use more number of faculty, more number of institution, universities I have to increase. And of course, that has to be possibly one solution, but that's a slow process. Now, what has happened over the last 2 years is, of course, suddenly we find because of the pandemic, the online education, okay? And you say that one person now, goes out on the, outside, and then there's so many people can actually do it. Of course, it's a great way of reaching out. But, when you go for PhD, if you are a master's and BTech level or the regular fundamental education, can you trust so much on the online education where the quality can be guaranteed? Now, that challenge will always be there. See, we also talk about various people, in different universities in India, NITs, IITs, CFTI, so many state, other private colleges. How do you guarantee that the quality when you actually jack up your throughput? Okay, which is very difficult. Okay, of course, there will be a skilling part. There is a reskilling that we are talking about, which is like an educational outreach program, which we can do that. Okay, because that mechanism, because that doesn't need so much of contact-based education. We can use all these online-based methods because they know basically the fundamentals, other things. It's just a new thing. So we have to help them grow. But the fundamentals, the core part of education has to have a physical thing, right? At least that's my understanding. People nowadays, they say, oh, online education, this is like a new, thing, and this will solve all our problems. No, I think, as I beg to differ as a student, if I am a student, particularly in my formative phases, right? Or when you need to have a constant kind of interaction with my professor as a PhD student, I would like to be always in touch with the professor, being there with the person, learning from my peers, learning from my colleagues. These are all part of learning, right? So if you remove that and just go like a one-dimensional online process, maybe at some point the quality would be at stake. So this is something that we need to take. I think we need to sit down, okay, at some point and really do planning. And this is where probably a lot of things could happen, where, for example, we should possibly tie up with various international bodies, different universities and others, because some of them have already spare capacity. They are also producing enough number of people. So right now in India, to create that ecosystem, when you need that kind of manpower, then probably we can actually take help from certain other kind of universities from abroad, or get the manpower which can be hosted at various levels of various colleges, in engineering colleges and other, let's say, state colleges, IITs, NITs, to see that the number can be enhanced. Okay, the time is already, the clock is ticking, and this is probably a good time, because a lot of new things are happening, which is actually dependent so much on the semiconductor technology. Because one is, of course, the IoT and in the cyber physical space, we need a lot of sensors, okay? And displays now everywhere. So we need, no matter what it is, we need displays, okay? And that's also, you'll have everybody wants in a communication. So as a matter of any platform, if you look at whatever platform it is, then today is based on certain electronic devices. And the key enabler is the semiconductor technology. And we had, I think earlier, we did not pick it up earlier, but because possibly for various reasons, including that simply it has been too expensive to invest at that point. But at some point, when you look at all this manufacturing, like our industry is a lot more mature. So many unicorns are coming out. So many companies are going global, which are Indian companies. So I see there is a bright future coming in terms of having a very nice ecosystem based on our semiconductor technology. But it has to be a collective effort. And we need to join hands today, no matter whether it's an industry, academia, take other people, various sources, the government agencies. Let's, as if, I can say from IIT Bombay, we'll be very happy to partner with all of you, okay, to see that this particular dream of our country to be, in one of the forefront of this semiconductor technology, that actually becomes a reality. And we are responsible in terms of making that dream come true. So thank you for inviting me, and I hope that you have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you very much.